So it's really an interesting theme. When did you get the idea of putting the book together? Is it sort of bringing together musings over the decades, or did it come to you all of it once?
No. It's been germinating for a long time. But I sat down to write it seriously in the summer of '93, and finished it by.
Just recently, yeah.
Just recently, yeah.
Yeah, welcome very, very much to Conversations. I'm pleased to welcome to the program Dabiel Lazare, and he's the author of a really very interesting book. Let me show it right here at the outset and let people know what it looks like. And it's called The Frozen Republic: How the Constitution is Paralyzing Democracy. The Constitution is paralyzing democracy. That is a pretty controversial subject, and it's a very interesting book, I can tell you from personal experience having read it. And I'm very, very happy to welcome to the program Dabiel Lazare. Welcome to Conversations.
Thank you very much.
Manhattan Network. I wonder, maybe you could share with the audience yourself, your own background. I know you're a journalist and you do a lot of independent work and so forth. Maybe you could just share your own academic or general background.
I'm a freelance journalist, and my academic training is in English. But I'm also a student of history, on my own, and started writing this book full time in the summer of '93. Finished it up in early '95, and it's just been published in early '96.
Yeah, we were just chatting now. I asked you whether it came all at once or you got the idea, or because it's a very large theme. It's a very large idea that you present, and did it come all at once? And then maybe we can get to that idea. But how did you get the idea to write this book? That calls into question, if I may, perhaps because it's a very sacred document.
Oh,
it's like attacking Holy Writ.
Absolutely right.
But
well, I mean, I guess the first moment it came to me was in the early '80s when my wife went to law school, and I was in graduate school in English at the time, and I was just struck by the difference in the way the two subjects were taught. I mean, law is very Euclidean. You start with this postulate of the Constitution. You build these cases from there. And in English, it's the opposite. Everything is open to question. What's a text? What's the canon? Should we have a canon? What is art? What is the process of art? I mean, everything is open to question. So I was sort of amazed at the difference between these two fields. And then I realized that if you just brought some skepticism to bear on the question of the Constitution, this itself, right? If you just approach it a little differently, then suddenly you could do wonderful things, and sort of explore avenues which really had never been explored before, or not in a long time.
Yeah, but because you understand well, I know that in this generally and widespread secular-oriented world of ours, the Constitution has taken on, as I said earlier, almost a notion of Holy Writ, and people will take that almost as though it came down off Sinai or something.
Oh,
you
absolutely.
understand what I'm saying?
Right. No, in fact, what I was doing is a little bit like what some early biblical exegetes did when they sort of looking at the Bible not as not the way theologians had looked at it, which was the Word of God, but sort of looked at it more skeptically and scrutinized it more intellectually and tried to figure out why was this written in this historical period, and sort of seeing it more dispassionately as an historical document. So I started doing the same thing. And so it was a fascinating experiment. It was really great. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, indeed. I think it's really a service that you've given in terms of this approach. And let's talk about the book a little bit. Let's talk about the Constitution itself and what some of your. Why don't you give us the major premise of the book, and then we can address the matter in a conversational way.
Most Americans view the Constitution legally, which means that they see the Constitution as the law, and the law must be obeyed. So the law says this, and therefore we've got to do this. The law says that, therefore we must do that. And in various points the law is unclear, so therefore we've got to argue and debate as to what the law really says. So we have these great struggles as to whether, as to what the Constitution really means. But I approached it politically. And it's sort of like viewing a fishbowl from inside versus from outside. And if you view it, come at it politically, you just look at it as a plan of government. And as a plan of government, it's simply one of many plans of governments, out there in the world. And you can sort of view it and sort of weigh its merits and its demerits, relative to other kinds of governments. You can decide, where its strengths lie and where its faults lie. But in so doing, you essentially liberate yourself from the logic of the law, because the law essentially says you can't do this. The law says this is the Constitution, you must obey it. It can only be changed in the following extremely difficult manner. Mm-hmm. But once you liberate yourself from those strictures, then you can sort of like view it as a whole, and you can sort of see that, well, that's how the Constitution says it may be changed. But we, the people, are we under the Constitution or are we over the Constitution? Are we truly bound, given as a sovereign entity, to obey the Constitution in this respect, or can we act upon the Constitution in its entirety? That must sound terribly vague.
No, not at all. Not at all. You're getting at an important question, but everybody would understand in a certain sense John Locke and coming out of the Enlightenment, coming into that period when the founding fathers are given a reverence in this country, and it was an amazing array of talent, and or maybe you perhaps will take exception.
I think
they got together in Philadelphia and crafted this document and so forth. And one of the things, particularly Madisonian, you take exception, was that there be a constitution that would limit authority against an unbridled majority, right, and that there do be anchors specifically written into the system under which we operate, so that we could avoid the problems of overweening authority, which they saw coming out of a dynastic history as a major problem that they were confronting. And does that not hold true, or not?
I think if you look at the document from outside, you can see that that represents a certain kind of thinking which is prevalent in the 18th century, mm-hmm, and that was that power was dangerous, mm-hmm, that democracy was synonymous with disorder and mob rule and anarchy, and the purpose of any wise republic, wisely arranged republic, was to balance what they called back in those days the rule of the one, the few, and the many. These are the eternal. This is the tripod on which all 18th century political science rests. Mm-hmm. In England, the one was the president, the few were the House of Lords, the aristocracy, and the many were the people. Mm-hmm. They had to be carefully counterposed to one another. In America, of course, it became the president, the Senate, and the House. But that's what that was the best thinking of the day in the 18th century. But since then, thinking has evolved, mm-hmm, everywhere but the United States, and more modern thinking, beginning with Bentham and carrying on through Marx and the creation of the German Social Democratic Party in the 1870s, sees democracy not as disorder, but as a new order, one the people create for themselves and the people order themselves. And the people, therefore, craft this new political structure so as to order political discourse and order politics in a way they think is most conducive to their rule. Mm-hmm. And so, in the 18th century, the most advanced thinkers of the day saw democracy as disorderly. In the early 19th century, democratic reformers saw the old Whig rule as disorderly, and saw themselves as bringing order to this aristocratic anarchy that had prevailed.
Yeah, but coming out of the historical context of dynastic, just emerging into the era of the nation state. I mean, it was just beginning to emerge. That was a whole new thing on the scene as far as what was developing. It does begin the day, we the people of the United States, and they claim to be establishing a democratic order, which in and of itself was in a certain sense seen as a breakthrough that was then followed by the French Revolution and other kinds of developments and the beginning of the nation state. And so putting it in its historical context.
But nowhere does the word democratic appear in the Constitution.
Interesting. All right.
And the preamble is, you're quite right, it's a quite amazing bit of prose. It says, we the people, in order to do this and that and this and that, what was the phrase? I forgot. To create this Constitution for the United States of America.
Yeah.
And that was pretty amazing. And that suggests that the people are sovereign. Mm-hmm. Because the people at that moment, although the Constitution didn't say that, they were at the same moment tearing up the existing Constitution, mm-hmm, which were the Articles of Confederation,
right,
and putting a new Constitution in its place. So they were acting on the Constitution from without.
And they were actually trying to put ability for a greater degree of ability for the centralized system to be able to operate over the unwieldy confederation that had been set up before.
So the preamble is really quite a revolutionary statement, but then it's followed for the next several pages by an endless delineation and limitation upon the people's power.
Upon the power of the authority.
Of we the people. So by the time you get to Article 5, which is the amending clause, it turns out that we the people, even though we've created this document, can only change it. If we want to change so much as a comma, we've got to go through this laborious, slow crawl, requiring 2/3 of each House of Congress plus 3/4 of the states before we can change, so much as a comma in the Constitution. And in one case, we can't. In one case, we can't change it at all. In fact, so the preamble suggests that people are over the Constitution. The people are the prime movers, the makers and breakers of the Constitution. Article 5, the amending clause, suggests that people are under the Constitution. And that's contradictory, I would say.
Yeah, was it growing out of the sense of natural order, natural law? They had a concept of natural law, and that there were certain principles that can be embodied, whether this is in a secular document. We hold these truths to be self-evident. They had certain. In a certain, say, quasi-religious sense, in a certain idea, that there are certain principles that are absolutely anchoring and bound, that we're bound by.
Yes.
And they deliberately made it so that you could not veer easily from those. And we'll have an endless array of people who will have defended the fact that it is difficult to do that over the years. If we look back to the history of our republic, right?
Yes, there's the idea that
I understand.
You're
arguing against the tide of a lot of people of conventional wisdom, I know.
Well, it fixed certain principles in place permanently, but the point is, what are those principles? And the principles are limited government, separation of powers, checks and balances, and essentially a kind of an immobilized and immobilizing form of government, where government is designed to be inefficient because efficiency in government is seen as being dangerous.
Yeah, right.
So therefore we've got to have a hobbled government. Somehow an inefficient government is the best guarantor of our liberty.
In order that the power could reside in the people themselves, as a
well, yes, but it's a very pessimistic view of government because it assumes that government itself is intrinsically anti-democratic, rather than seeing government as an instrument of democracy and itself a force for democracy.
Well, they were but weren't they, Daniel? I mean, you know more than
yes,
I
they were.
Followed it. They were on the cutting edge in the historical pattern of where they were of establishing or reestablishing or trying to establish the nation state, the idea of democracy based and coming out of a period of dynastic states, which had been based upon the absolute authority, based upon even the divine right of kings and so forth. And so within the historical context, it could be understood or not. I mean, as cutting edge in its time?
Yes, it was cutting edge in its time, but unfortunately, what's cutting edge in one time is no longer cutting edge in another time. And they were quickly surpassed by the French Revolution. And then they got themselves in huge trouble during the Civil War over the slavery issue, of course, which led to an incredible bloodbath.
To a constitutional crisis.
Yeah, to a constitutional crisis, which led to a civil war, which led to a horrendous bloodbath, one of the most disastrous, military episodes of the entire 19th century, anywhere in the world. And then by the latter 19th century, we're frozen and we're deeply paralyzed, and we're rapidly falling behind other countries, to the point where even Bismarckian Germany was pulling out ahead and was experimenting with new forms of government and new forms of social legislation, whereas the Americans were still stuck back in the 18th century. Now, what happens in the American system is frozen. Occasionally it unjams and the ice breaks, and suddenly you have this great headlong rush of change. But the point is, the rhythms of American government is you have 75 years of a deep freeze followed by a quasi-revolutionary breakthrough followed by another 75 years of deep freeze.
You said there are many other systems other than the one that was devised or cobbled together in the Constitution that were that people could repair to and so forth. What are some of the other systems of government that you would say, coming out of that period, that that had been developed, that might be considered?
Well, you had back in the 18th century, you had an extremely centralized, much more fluid system that was taking shape in Britain, where the House of Commons was the chief power, clearly clearly more powerful than either the monarchy or the House of Lords, although it was married to this extremely rigid and corrupt Whig oligarchy at the time. Then in the French Revolution, you saw the emergence of a truly modern theory of popular sovereignty, in which the people were clearly taking the role of the all-powerful creator and destroyer, destroyer of old regimes, creator of new ones. At the same time, you saw the rise of utilitarianism in Britain, and Jeremy Bentham, and he was he was creating a new theories of government, which were both parliamentarian, extremely fluid, constantly self-reinventing, and democratic. And then you had the invention of the mass party in the 1870s in Germany with the rise of the Social Democrats. And the whole point is, as the story progresses, the whole point is that there's been a certain evolution in political theory. But in America, we've been stuck with what is officially known as the greatest form of government ever created in the history of mankind and ever to be created in the history of mankind.
We hear it endlessly.
And so therefore,
it really is Holy Writ.
And therefore it's impossible to ever improve upon that. But my whole point is that people have improved upon it. And we can learn from what other people have done.
And you're talking about improving upon it in the systems where you look at it root and branch. You're not going to do a little reform here or change.
Yes, exactly right.
That we ought to be able to take its power of being able to see that the times they are changing, and that we maybe need some sort of a new system by which we will assume a new political order that could...
Yes.
I don't want to use the word loosely. Scrap the Constitution, or
I prefer the verb. I prefer the verb bust.
All right.
Constitution.
All right.
Yes. I mean, the only constitutional change that's permitted under the current system is change according to the Constitution. Which is according to the terms of Article 5, which is, in order to amend the Constitution, you must have 2/3 of each house plus 3/4 of the states. My proposal is to change the Constitution, but not to do it according to the method outlined in the Constitution, but to do it democratically, which is to change it through a simple majority rule. And this is a little complicated, so permit me to explain.
Take time to explain, because it is important,
There's one wonderful clause in Article 5, which, I mean, the article describes the rigmarole you have to go through in order to change the Constitution. Then it ends up with a real zinger. It says, notwithstanding all the above, no state shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate without its consent. What that means is that although California has, at this point, 32 million people, and Wyoming has under 500,000 people, as long as Wyoming stands on its rights, it shall have the same 2 votes as California forevermore. And the mountains may crumble to say forevermore. And there is nothing the other 49 states, nothing the other 99.5% of the population can do. Well, this is just crazy. I mean, other countries can reform their upper houses, so why can't we? I mean, this is a dictatorship. This is like saying, like the people may never overthrow the king. The people may never reform the upper house according to some more democratic, rule of one person, one vote. I might add, by the way, in New York, which has 18 million people, we have 37 times Wyoming's population.
In California, is how many times?
67 times.
Holy Toledo, that really is a big difference.
Oh, yeah. And in 1790, the differential was only 12 to 1. That's between the largest and smallest state. Today, it's 67 to 1, as I said, and in 25 years, it'll be 72 to 1. So the gap is widening, yet according to the Constitution, the people can do nothing about it.
What was the principle they were trying to build in there?
We have no idea. I mean, first of all, it was adopted by unanimous voice vote on the second to last day of the convention in 1787. The convention was organized according to state delegations, so they were simply entrenching their form of organization. And they were tired. It had been a long summer. They clearly were tired, and there was no debate, as far as I can tell, according to the minutes of the convention. And clearly,
something as important as that.
Clearly, the founders goofed. I mean, clearly, these are mortal men, believe it or not. I mean, although everyone tells us they were demigods,
I understand.
These are clearly mortal men who clearly made a mistake, and as we all do, which is why pencils have erasers and computers have delete keys. So, I'm simply saying that the people have the power to correct this mistake that was made by mortal men some 2 centuries ago. And that the only way they can do it, the only conceivable way they can do it, is to do it democratically by a simple majority vote. That's the only practical standard which can be used to overcome this great flaw, which means that the 54% of the population, which lives in just 10 states, by the way.
Interesting, really?
Can take it unto themselves to do away with this one permanent clause through a simple majority. And in so doing, they will wind up, as I say, busting the Constitution, because they'll wind up destroying it from within and substituting a new theory of government for the old Madisonian theory. A theory being is that the Democratic majority is sovereign and therefore should have complete power to alter its political surroundings in whatever way it deems, most conducive to its interests. That's democracy.
Yeah, and that was cobbled together. That idea of that. I mean, but behind it, of course, was the idea there probably was a political reality behind it.
Yeah, there's political reality.
There was at the time that existed to sort of differentiate from just a strictly different demographic allocation of power and have one be geographic according to these state entities.
Oh, so it was a way of reassuring the states that this in this one respect states' rights would be permanent.
Right. And they were coming out of the Articles of Confederation.
Right, and states' rights would be permanently counterbalanced to popular rights.
Now, what is there something positive to be said about that differentiation of power around the country and not have it all based directly on direct...
Well, perhaps...
I'm thinking this through,
Well, perhaps it would be, but I would argue that whether it's positive or negative can only be resolved democratically. Because there really is no way to answer that question under the Constitution, because the Constitution does not open this issue to debate. I mean, this is the law. The law is unchangeable. It's right there in black and white. And I'm saying that the people may think there's something, that there may be something positive to this, but the people can conclude yes or no only by collectively debating and deciding as to whether this is a positive or a negative feature. The people must collectively, exert their will over the document as a whole, not under the document, but over the document.
Because we're supposed to be a nation of the people.
We, the people of the United States, the first 7 words of the Constitution. Yeah, in a certain sense, everything that follows is postscript from those first 7 words.
I see. If that were to happen, let's say the Senate were to become what? Would you keep the Senate? I mean,
if you ask me, would I keep the Senate? Personally, no. Personally, I would. I would argue for an all-powerful, a sovereign National Assembly.
A sovereign National Assembly.
With elected according to proportional representation, which means that if a party gets 25% of the popular vote, it gets 25% of the seats.
Okay, let me back up a little bit. Do you advocate your position as one that we really have like a constitutional convention, or that we fundamentally change the way in which we the system under which we're to operate this country?
Yes.
All right.
I think we have no choice. I think it's this gap between the big states and small states is opening up wider and wider. Sooner or later, it's going to break. Sooner or later, the system's going to snap.
You don't seem to see that issue raised.
But it's got to essentially.
Except by you.
At some point,
somebody's got to.
At some point, California will be 100 times bigger than Wyoming. At some point, it's going to snap, right? I mean, the laws of physics suggest
pick up on that.
It's got to break sooner or later.
Those people in California are going to be getting a little upset with that.
They should be. I can't believe they aren't upset already.
Why aren't they? Why haven't they been?
Because this habit of obedience goes very deep into the American soul.
It's just like accepting dogma or
yeah. It's like a
Holy Writ. Yeah.
Yeah, if you were a peasant in 14th century Italy, of course you went to mass. Of course you obeyed the local priest. I mean, of course. I mean, to say otherwise would be just would be unthinkable.
The prince, yes,
right. Yeah. And if you were to tell them like, well, I think we should have elections. we should have elections, and we should have popular sovereignty. I mean, people would look at you like you're crazy. It was beyond their intellectual framework.
You're really going out on, you're really going out, I don't know, what's a metaphor? Thin ice, a long branch, a deep, you're going out into new territory here with this suggestion, obviously, because this is very unusual that you would be proposing that. You think the forces, many of the inoperative forces within our society, the mass angst and discontent that Mr. Buchanan is tapping into, other things, the signs of there being a mass discontent among the society, might have and the problems of there being need for some sort of a change beyond the traditional way in which this country is operated, could be to a considerable extent traced to the fact that the constitutional system under which we operate is inherently inefficient.
Well, first of all,
should be recognized as part of the cause of the problem?
Yes, but first of all, you have to remember, America is a remarkable country.
Yes, it is indeed.
It's an entire country of 250 million people, which is really founded on a single document. Now, this isn't to say that the Constitution, the Constitution is not the whole story of what's created this country, but everything that's happened in this country has been filtered through the Constitution. our national personality has been shaped by this document. I mean, the fabric of our politics, the fabric of the nature of our political discourse has been shaped by this document. There was a marvelous, really a very great and really sadly neglected thinker from the mid-19th century whose name was Sidney George Fisher, who remarked that the Constitution was a finality unto itself. It was it recognized no law but its own and was changeable only according to its own laws. So it's this reflexive system which is constantly turning in upon itself, which is why in moments of stress like that exist now, you have people Reagan used to say, who said, "Come home, America"? That was Reagan's slogan. And we have Pat Buchanan now saying that America must return to its roots. It's strayed too far from its roots. So the Constitution is constantly, as the country is constituted, it's constantly sort of drawing back in on itself and sort of folding up within. And I think the problem with that is we constantly, Americans, because we have this holy document, we see all our problems as a manifestation of impurity and corruption, of falling away from this holy document. And therefore, reformers always talk about returning to this holy law of cleansing the temple, of driving out the money changers, of scrubbing clean the altar and putting the Constitution back in its place. And that's the way religious people think. And my point is
fundamentalists.
Fundamentalists think, and America is a constitutionally fundamentalist country.
That's interesting.
And liberals and conservatives alike. And my point is simply, it's not a sacred constitution. It's a document created by mortal men. Leave it alone. The 18th century is a long time ago. It's time to move on. We can profit by what these people taught. There's no reason we shouldn't learn. We shouldn't study Madison and Hamilton, although there are others we can study as well. But it's time to move forward. We should see reform. Americans see reform as a process of cleansing and purification and return to roots. We should see reform, rather, as a process of moving forward, of coming up with new ideas to deal with new problems. And this is not the way it's seen in America, and this is the way it should be seen in America.
You get a lot of opposition, obviously, to that premise, as you put it. There's a saying that the greatest threat to revolution or major change is reform, because they keep trying to tinker and make things fine-tune and make everything that way. And people have a reluctance to try and think in terms of to think anew. Have you seen anything within the political leadership who has begun to think in these terms? We've had, and maybe you could share with. Have you got allies there, or you must feel pretty much a voice in the wilderness?
Well, I've got readers, and that's certainly a nice thing.
No, but do you understand what I'm saying? Because it doesn't say it isn't totally timely. It might very well be totally timely. But it's not that much discussed in the general press.
Well, number one, I think the Americans are deeply upset about the shape their society is in, and are deeply hungry for change. And I think Pat Buchanan, in a very perverted way, reflects that hunger. And a few others have begun to think about some of these structural problems. For example, Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
Yes.
Has done some studies and is on record as saying that this question of these gross inequities in the Senate must be addressed. No one's addressing them now because the system doesn't allow us to address it, but nonetheless they must be addressed. You have to remember that every member of Congress takes an oath to defend and uphold the Constitution. So therefore that means that the Constitution says thou shalt not discuss inequities in the Senate. Every member of Congress therefore holds his tongue. And Daniel Patrick Moynihan is one of the very few who have ventured any opinion whatsoever on this subject. I'm just convinced. I'm convinced that this is a deep flaw. And this is a deep point of weakness, and eventually it's got to be addressed.
Okay, we talk about this in the Senate. Let's just say, okay, we haven't discussed that. We've discussed more. Other aspects of the system besides the disproportionate representation in the Senate of the population?
The whole thing.
Tick off some of the others, or whichever you think are particularly important.
It's a mess from top to bottom.
Wow. Well, that's pretty all-inclusive.
First of all, separation of powers and checks and balances is a nightmare. The federal government is a four-headed beast between the presidency, the Supreme Court, the House, and the Senate. Each one pulling in a different direction. I mean, it's a gridlock machine, and it's a machine for the institutionalization of political chaos. But that's only the tip of the iceberg, because beneath the federal government, you've got 50 states, each with their own little tripartite or quadripartite arrangements.
Counties.
And then below them, you've got an astonishing array of 83,000 local governments of one shape or the other. Tax levying or legally autonomous governments. With each one with a lawyer at its beck and call, ready to sue or be sued. Yeah. And the whole thing is, it's a Hobbesian war of all against all.
Wow. Interesting.
And anyone who looks at this incredible array, I mean, what it really resembles is 16th century France, when there were thousands and thousands of petty potentates, each with his own private army, and there'd be 100 civil wars going on at any given moment across the country. I mean, but anyone who looks at this system can tell that, it just needs an overhaul. I mean, we've got to get a commission with the power to rearrange things and decide, let's instill some order into this crazy system, which has never had to undergo that process. I mean, essentially, American government has really not changed really fundamentally since the first, Englishmen arrived here in the early 17th century. So we've got to, and other countries do this all the time. I mean, all the time they're looking at local government and county government and state government or whatever the equivalent is, and deciding, well, how can we fix this here and rejigger that there and make this more efficient there in order to make the thing work better. But Americans don't think of government as a mechanism. They think of government as a holy legacy handed down by their forefathers, which they are under rather than being over. Americans don't have this. Americans are pre-modern, and they don't have any belief in the rational abilities of the human mind. They have this 18th century view that people are inherently passionate and disorderly, and the idea that the demos can function as a rational orderer of things is really, it's unconstitutional, really.
And that conflict like that. All right, bring us up a little. Yeah, but you're right. But I mean, there will be people who could say, well, yeah, true enough. We have all these things, you can strike them up, but the country has, in a certain sense, done pretty well. It's the world leader. It's got an economy that's built. It's got it sets a pattern for the world in the minds of many. People are flocking to come here. It isn't all an unmitigated failure. In fact, there's been a great deal of success that we've achieved under this Constitution and under a system that is that successful on a world pattern, particularly now the Soviet Union has fallen apart. We're here and so forth. We don't just cavalierly throw out the system under which we've done so well, taking the argument that everything isn't all black, but that there's been considerable success and we have a bright future, and that kind of an argument, which would be the one that a good deal of the leadership and a lot of the people would want to think.
But even that argument itself, though, is predicated on the idea that people have the power over the Constitution. People can consider whether to toss it out or keep it in, and even in making that determination, the people themselves must recognize that they have the power to do either, which the American people really don't quite realize they do. So in a certain sense, I mean, once you even begin to consider that, and in a certain sense, the question leads to an answer. Because once you begin to consider the possibility of throwing it out, then you must realize you do have the power to throw it out if you wish. And when you realize you have the power, then you must recognize that you are not eternally under the Constitution, that you have power over the Constitution.
Wait a minute, you have the power. How do we have the power to, within constitutional limits, how do we have the power to throw the Constitution out?
Well, there's a theory which says...
Self-destruct mechanism built.
Well, there's a theory which says the Constitution actually has two amending clauses. This is a theory that was devised by a professor at Yale named Akil Amar Reed. So I hope I have the name correct.
Okay.
And that is, it has one amending clause in Article 5, which, as I said before, that's the article which says 2/3 of each house plus 3/4 of the states to amend the Constitution.
Right.
The theory goes, however, that there exists another amending clause in the Constitution, and that is the preamble, which says that we the people, in order to do this, that, and this, and that, do ordain and establish the Constitution for the United States. And by implication, it suggests that we, the people of the United States, should we decide that this document is not, creating a more perfect union instead of, establishing domestic tranquility, et cetera, we, the people, therefore possess the power to toss this one out and put another document in its place. And that power, by the way, was explicit in the Declaration of Independence, which said that, what is the phrase? You probably know it, that whenever there's not
the duty of the people
to alter government, whenever it's not suiting their purposes, right.
As part of the reason for the Second Amendment, perhaps.
Well, that's another complicated story.
Right.
But the point is so therefore the preamble is the constitutional justification, which places the people over the Constitution rather than under the Constitution.
So these things are.
But that was very important to Lincoln, by the way. Lincoln based his whole legal case in going into the Civil War on the preamble, because the Article 5 had totally failed the country. Because Article 5 did not provide any means in order to tackle the slavery issue. Although the great majority of Americans opposed slavery, Article 5 gave the South a stranglehold over national politics. So Lincoln essentially appealed to the preamble over Article 5 and saying that people had this power over the Constitution. People were empowered over it, not just under it, to change it in toto. The American people have never...
It's a pretty important precedent, isn't it, then, in terms of deciding this very important issue that you're raising?
I think it's important, too.
Also, that there is room for interpretation of these things more than it's absolutely written in stone. Maybe we were talking about the psychology of the reverence that people give to it by the American people, perhaps inordinately they do that. But there is some room for seeing a root and branch change.
Well, I think
within the constitutional system.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about the Constitution is it's a much more interesting document than the law professors let on. That if you look at it only legally, it's a very sort of constricted view. But if you look at it politically, you can see that it's rife with contradictions. It's this very sort of rich document. And that, in a certain sense, what gives it its life is its contradictions.
They had this the Constitution, a delicate balance where all the people would come and talk about it. You got how many constitutional lawyers can dance on the end of an amendment? I mean, there's lawyers. You're right. There's so many lawyers that keep the system up. Well, there's so much of that kind of thing, and I can see what you're saying. There's a great deal of inefficiency. I wonder, can you go to what do you propose? What would you see? What do you think, given the difficulties and given the fact that we have this period of extraordinary change in the air now? What do you see as an alternative that you think might be an appropriate thing for us, or the intellectuals, or whoever, to begin to think about as an alternative?
I think the most important thing is to bust the Senate. I mean, I think that I cannot understand why we in New York should be, or in any large state, should be underrepresented. The small states, by the way, the least populous states, by the way, are predominantly rural. They have far fewer minorities, far fewer blacks, far fewer Jews, presumably far fewer gays than the rest of the country. The Supreme Court has disallowed much less gross inequities at the state or local level. So why should we put up with this gross inequity that no one else in the advanced industrial world puts up with?
Suppose somebody were to argue the other way, like from an economic analysis, and Adam Smith says you should have an invisible hand that will allocate resources and so forth, and that there's an inequity that exists, but then when there's an inequity, there's going to be somebody go and fill that inequity, and maybe when we finally get our things together, instead of doing that, there's going to be a lot of people going to move to Wyoming.
So that's
that it'll sort itself out with an invisible hand of do you understand that kind of thing? And you say, don't be so impetuous. Just let things wait, and they'll sort themselves out. Young man, things will sort themselves out.
It's a classic conservative argument. You have this all-powerful king. It seems unjust that one man should have so much power. So therefore, stop complaining, live with it. So let the king do his business. You do your business. Don't worry about it. Fortunately, people have to the hell with that kind of logic, and have overthrown kings and established popular sovereignty.
And you think there might be something in this Buchanan thing, you think, right, tied into this? And maybe sub rosa, at an unconscious or low, not even realizing that that's it, or because I don't see it voiced that much. Mr. Moynihan has been very much of an intellectually, he's adventurous in terms of thinking of new things, but I haven't seen it raised in in that strong dimension by, say, somebody like a Perot or by a Buchanan or by anybody like that.
No.
Ever.
Right.
Except now, right? And maybe they ought, right?
Well,
it's
not quite ever. I mean, the populist, the socialist party on the turn of the century, I mean, all campaigned against this stuff. One point I make in the book is that since the New Deal, and especially the Roosevelt's judicial revolution of 1937, in a certain way, the rise of a liberal Supreme Court. I mean, the Supreme Court had always been this arch conservative force.
That was overturned, though.
Well, yeah, but beginning in 1937, the court packing incident, that's when the Supreme Court was sent on its liberal course. Yeah. And that, and as I argue, that has led to a kind of a renewed constitutional orthodoxy, so that we actually have much less debate over about the Constitution now than we had at the turn of the century. At the turn of the century, people were much more adventurous when it came to these things. Now the orthodoxy actually is stronger now than it was in the turn of the century, because we have this entire liberal establishment which has based itself on judicial review, which would be aghast at at any attempt to overthrow judicial review. My quarrel, I mean, I'm a man of the left. My quarrel, though, is as much with the ACLU as it is with Judge Robert Bork.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Why?
Because the ACLU predicates itself on this completely ahistorical view of the Bill of Rights, which is, I said, it's historically without any foundation at all. And the ACLU never answers the question that if the Bill of Rights is so great, why is the state of civil liberties so awful in this country? I mean, every annual report that the ACLU issues is filled with with moanings, horror stories about how terrible things are.
Not to mention Amnesty International.
Right.
But that's another issue.
Well, I mean, if things are so terrible, why don't they get any better?
Yeah.
I mean, like, if we have this wonderful Bill of Rights, I mean, why are things always so terrible?
Mr. Perot and others who are attacking things are attacking big government. They're attacking government, but they're beginning now to more and more people, Mr. Buchanan, I think, now is attacking not only big government, concentration of power in the governmental hands, but he's also attacking the concentration of power, political and economic power in the private sector as well. It could have been that there is this private sector other than government that could have had something to do with sociological and economic conditions in the country, apart from the government. If you understand what I'm saying. It's not all the fact that we're not organized our government properly. There's also inequities within the private sector, and that can be dealt with without changing the constitutional basis, and we would reach a state of happy equilibrium, or a happier state that you would say changing the Constitution might lead to.
You're asking me, are you asking me whether I agree with that?
I guess so.
The answer is no.
All right. Right. Oh, but there are these other forces that are operative.
I think at this point there's no prospect of significant political change without constitutional change. I think the system is so dysfunctional.
Really?
It's so oppressive that it's impossible to imagine moving forward at all without tackling these questions. I think American politics can only become more dysfunctional under the present arrangement, which is why I see Buchanan as simply the latest and most grotesque manifestation of this ongoing political breakdown.
Well, you don't think there's a third-party possibility or something of that?
No.
Or progressive force?
No, I think the American system is uniquely hostile to third parties.
Okay, what do you see?
I guess there is a possibility of a third party. I mean, if there was a complete breakdown in the Republican and Democrats, I mean, that could happen. It happened last in 1856 when the Republicans broke through. But that was only after the Whig Party had completely disintegrated over the slavery issue. So I guess it's possible, but it is inordinately hard and harder than ever to organize a third party in this country. And I also believe that if a third party were organized under present conditions, one that was not an explicitly,
constitutional,
anti-constitutional party. Yeah, it would have to be a party of the right. Yeah, it would have to be a Buchananite party.
You think it would?
And it would be extremely dangerous.
They couldn't. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. All right. What do you see? What would you like to see? Let's say.
Well, I mean,
what do you advocate?
I mean, ideally, I advocate a simple, the purest kind of parliamentary democracy, which would be a national assembly. Elected on the basis of proportional representation, which means that every party is awarded seats in the National Assembly on the basis of its share of the popular votes. So if the XYZ party gets 15% of the votes, it gets 15% of the seats in the National Assembly. And this National Assembly would be would reflect the sovereign will of the people. Its powers would be totally unbounded. It would be the government of the people. It could do as much or as little as it wished. If conservatives were elected the head of the government, then the conservatives would probably govern the country in a conservative fashion,
Well,
undoubtedly.
if the conservatives, you mean in terms of this National Assembly you're talking about?
Right.
If there was a they had 51% and all the rest, or a plurality?
No, a majority.
A
majority. Any party or coalition which can put together 51% of the votes, or 50.1%, wins, and they get the power.
And what happens to is there a shadow government or something like that, or the opposition, or is there opposition, or?
No, sure, there's opposition. Of course there is.
There's opposition within the parliament, right? Always, right?
And also outside it as well. The other 49% has the right to holler like hell, and to criticize the government every step of the way, and to say, and to point up how they're screwing things up, and how they would do it much better if they were in power, to stand up on the floor of the National Assembly and to denounce them at every turn. And the only rule being is that you would have an election with within some certain set period of time, and next year and last year's loser could be this year's winner. At which point, if we get 51% of the vote, we could do what we want to do.
How many people would you see being members of this assembly?
It's really irrelevant.
It's arbitrary.
It could be from 100 to 500, whatever you want to do.
100 to 5, but not 5,000.
No, because it's not, you could have 5,000 if you wanted to. It would be very expensive and cumbersome. There wouldn't be much point. The point is that what happens is the parties which win would form a government, and then power would then be wielded by the government, and the members of the party who are not in the cabinet, what they call in Britain the backbenchers, and they're the ones who simply they fill the seats in the assembly, but otherwise the power. A government operates as the executive committee of the National Assembly, and as long as it holds on to that majority, no matter how slim. John Major at this point has literally one vote as a one-person edge, one vote edge in the House in the House of Commons. So as long as they hold on to that majority, no matter how slim, they shall prevail.
Yeah, you do believe in the general rubric or the general term of participatory democracy, which is used by some, as opposed to a representative democracy, where the local authority, they use it. Mr. Perot will use it. Other people, it begins to creep in. Other people will do it. Yeah. Muammar Gaddafi organizes his country according to these people's congresses. The whole country meets, in these little meeting halls, and they have participatory democracy. They claim they're trying to establish and keep sovereignty at the level of the
I don't believe it's
town meetings
democratic,
and so forth. Yeah, well, perhaps no, but the model, the idea, Athens was tried to be organized that way, at least for the citizens. They had actual participatory democracy rather than there being a representation class. You don't think that there's any point in trying to think about that kind of thing as the new step in human development and human political development, away from, we had monarchy, then we got representative democracy, then we'll get participatory democracy in the hands of the individual people themselves. There's no point in thinking that way.
No, I think there is actually, and I see that as the role of the party government. In the 1870s, the German Social Democrats invented this new kind of political party. Previously, in Britain, political parties had been mere coteries among members of Parliament, MPs. There were little clubs, so the Tories would meet in one club, the Liberals would meet in the other club, and they would work out policy among them, and the people were uninvolved except when election time came, at which point a small portion of the people had the right to vote. But in the 1870s, with the creation of the German Social Democratic Party, you saw a new kind of party. Where you had a mass party, where workers, were organized in locals and branches, and they met every week and they debated the policy of the day, and they passed resolutions, and they passed the resolution onto the executive committee of the leadership of the National Party. And there were also, in the glory days of German socialism, there was also this incredible panoply of social organizations, singing clubs, gymnastic clubs,
and the
chess
welfare
clubs.
of the people was well taken care of.
Right,
relative to.
But it was all organized by. It was all this great party culture. So the party was a popular movement, and and if the Social Democrats, if the faction, if the fraction in the National Assembly did something that the rank and file didn't like, the rank and file gave him hell at the local branch meeting, and passed resolutions and organized and fought it out.
That was pretty participatory right there.
Precisely right.
Yeah.
But it was both local and national.
Yeah.
It took place at a local level, but the focus was simultaneously local and national.
And you can see some of that in terms of the system that you might envision as being one better for the United States of America.
It's amazing, you know. Yeah. It's amazing. There are no members of the Republican or Democratic Party. I mean, one can't join the Democratic Party.
Right.
I mean, one can't take out a membership card. Right. One can't pay one's dues, monthly dues, as one can do with the Labour Party or Tory Party in Britain, or the SDP or Christian Democrats in Germany. I mean, if you go to the Democratic Party and you ask to take out a membership card, they'll look at you like you're crazy.
Yeah. Or at least naive. Yeah.
Oh, they won't even understand what you're talking about. Right. So I think that real democracy would lead to real parties.
What do you mean, real democracy?
Well, I mean direct democracy, where the people have total power in their grasp, where there's nothing they can't change, where everything is up for grabs, where if you are if you're the party, if you are the government, you can change everything. You can order people to wear plaid on Wednesdays, you know, and brown on Sundays, theoretically. That one truly is sovereign, that government truly is sovereign. And when people have that kind of power, people are forced to think very carefully about what the purpose of a state is, what citizenship means, how they want to reorganize society, how they want to reshape society, and I think that encourages party members, therefore, are encouraged to think in the most profound philosophical terms of what kind of society they want.
All right. You say you're a man of the left and everything, but some people would say, how do you guard against some sort of a quasi-fascist development or something like that? If you get El Duce saying you will do this and that, or you're going to vote Hitler. Hitler was voted in.
You only do it by mobilizing the masses, to use a hallowed phrase out of the left-wing political lexicon. I mean, you only do that by creating a democratic movement, a democratic ethos. Americans think this is incredibly, dreamy-eyed and idealistic. Although Lincoln actually said as much.
All right.
But the point is that I would argue the opposite. I think paper guarantees don't mean anything.
All right.
I mean, I think the only guarantee of democracy is an aroused populace, a populace which believes that it must have a democratic culture in order to perpetuate its reign, in order to organize politics in a manner which is conducive to its interests.
And this is something new that you said earlier, you didn't think it's possible for the United States to move right, and the anger and angst, which is growing and growing and growing, and the almost a permanent crisis situation. When every year with these elections come and so forth, it goes like that. You don't think there's any way we can do it within the confines of the current system and without the kind of a change that you're advocating within this book?
No, I don't.
That's a really strong position to take.
Well, I think the problem is the current system fragments the polity. It turns the polity against itself. It divides the people against themselves, and the more and more they try to make this archaic system work, the more they wind up tying themselves in knots and working themselves up into a fury and driving themselves, into the arms of a Pat Buchanan who promises to do the impossible, which is to make this 18th century system work, and it's not going to work. I mean, we must modernize. We must leave the 18th century behind, and we must update our society. We must democratize it, and we must move into the modern world. I know all of American politics is predicated upon the opposite, so therefore, what I'm saying must sound very strange.
Not at all. Minority of one, if that need be, there's a voice often there's the one that ought to be heard, because in a strange time, it's very often that it's in a time of great stress where everybody's trying to argue in the old way. And there's a thing, what is it? The goldfish bowl. The fish swimming in the goldfish bowl can't see themselves until they get out of the bowl, and they've got to be sort of out one step removed, or in a system's way removed from the normally accepted context of understanding, and that can happen all at once. Right. I mean, that can dawn in a certain sense. I suppose you would presume or would think that that's something that might develop in the time immediately ahead, this kind of a consciousness?
I see. Yes, I hope it will.
That's obviously why you put a lot of effort into writing your book.
Yeah, and in my own modest way, I'm trying to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, right.
But the thing is, I really see no alternative. I mean, I think either there must be some way. If there is not an irrational solution to this problem, if there is not a rational solution to this problem, there will be an irrational solution to this problem.
And that's
which is what Buchanan represents.
Yeah, or worse.
Or worse.
There could be something worse.
It's hard to imagine what could be worse, but there conceivably could be something worse.
Well, I mean, you know, they keep coming along. I mean, you know, I mean, from your perspective, and then he's appealing to greater numbers as the system deteriorates. Why do you think it is? The economy's setting all kinds of standards, and it's going so well. All the people who are doing well, there's interest rates are low. You know, everything seems to be well. Everything's doing well, and there are people who are at the top of these. Some of these people now looking at this Republican candidate field and so forth, and they will just simply say, these people, this anger and angst that people are manifesting, it is irrational. It doesn't make any. There's no reason for them to be, because everything's fine. And if they would just be a little patient, everything will be all right.
It just goes to show the incredible poverty of the modern economics profession, you know, in a very narrow way they measure things, because I mean anybody can see that American society is in deep trouble.
I mean, that's a basic premise.
I mean, it just looks bad. It just is not in good shape. Anyone with two eyes can see that, and the voters see that, which is why the voters are extremely unhappy. I mean, a few corporate leaders, a few profiteers, you know, are making money out of this disorder, this chaos, and they're happy. But the mass of people are not happy at all.
Well, you think the masses, more than masses. Yeah, the people are, and most people do not want to think about change in any kind of way, because you know it's a difficult thing to think about and so forth. And
it's difficult to think.
It is difficult to think. It's difficult to think about things in a major kind of way. But in the fact that it's really, I just underscore it in a little sense that there are people who are, let's just say, doing well now, really cannot just incorporate in their own thinking the anger that there is among the people who feel that sense of anger. It's almost as like there's a gap that is almost insurmountable. They just don't understand it at all.
I think that the number of people who are doing well, truly well, shrinks with every passing year.
You do think?
I think yes. I think that there's a social breakdown. I think there's an urban crisis. There's a crime problem. There's even things like traffic congestion and suburban sprawl. Those are adversely affecting a greater and greater portion of the population.
And according to your thought and so forth, it had a great deal has to do against that delicate, the Constitution, that holy writ. The Constitution is paralyzing our democracy and our system. And the book, let me show it again, let people know. It's called The Frozen Republic, and it's by Dabiel Lazare. And here it is. You can see it in your bookstores. It's out, and I can only just wish you the best on putting forth this idea that you've got, Dabiel. And it's a very interesting one. It raises a lot of interesting ideas. We on Conversation, that ought to be discussed seriously and given a hearing, and hope we could help do that here. We in Conversation invite you to tune in. We'll be coming back again next week. Dabiel, thank you very, very much for writing the book and for coming in, and all the best to you in this venture. We invite you to tune in. We'll be coming back again next week. That's it for now. Again, Dabiel, thank you.
Thanks.
Until next time.